According to dbt's 2025 State of Analytics Engineering reporting, about 56% of data teams still say that data quality is an issue. Now, this is true and understandable because data quality is always a garbage in and garbage out scenario. Especially in this age where a lot of businesses are trying to plug AI into their data systems or semantic layer, you understand that the only context that the AI would get is dependent on the quality of data under the hood. Now, previously, when people worked with data quality or data testing was usually an afterthought. But with dbt, data quality and data testing can be part of a data workflow, so that while you're building your data pipelines and building models for your end users, you can integrate data quality into that workflow. Now, at the end of this video, you would have understood how to use dbt's testing features, learn how to set up dbt's schema test for yourself, how to set up the dbt cloud integration for alerts and schedules so you can get those alerts when your pipeline is failing, and also set up a framework for you to ensure that you always have data quality in place for your business. Remember, as a data professional, when working with business teams, data trust is a must. However, you can build that trust one brick at a time. And one of the ways that ensures that you build that trust is by ensuring that you have testing frameworks in place. Alright, so a quick overview of what dbt test is all about. Essentially, dbt tests or data tests are basically SQL statement that validates your data or your model. If it returns offending rows, the test fails. If no offending rows or defaulting records are returned, then your test passes. Essentially, what dbt does in practice is that it compiles your SQL query and runs it against your data warehouse. Say, for example, you have an assertion or a logic that says for your customer table, there shouldn't be null customer ID. So you write a query that returns records where the customer ID is null. If no records are returned, your test is successful. If a record is returned, your test is failed. Now, typically, your data test failure is going to halt your pipeline, essentially ensuring that bad data does not go into downstream models or downstream BI tools. Say, for example, you have models ABC that runs consecutively, say in a pipeline, for example. So, and data at the point where you have some transformation happening on model B or data model B, the test fails. Your pipeline is going to halt at that point, and the data would not be moved into table C, essentially ensuring that the only data you have downstream are data records that have been tested and vetted and having essential quality that meets the business requirements. What are the types of tests in dbt? We have the unit test, data test or dbt test, and then we have the source freshness test. We're going to talk about this test and walk through each of them briefly. First of all, let's start with the source freshness test. Just as the name implies, a source freshness test ensures that you only have fresh data coming into your data system. Data pipelines are always moving, but then you don't want to bring in data that is stale, or you don't want your business stakeholder to be the first person to see that your data is stale. So you want to have alerts test in place to ensure that if your data is stale, you are alerted before your business stakeholders are alerted. Now, you could set a source freshness test within your sources on dbt so that within a certain time frame, you can tell dbt to either give you a warning or a flag or a failure if that data is stale. You could set it to be in hours or days. You could say if your data record based on your inserted field, if it's greater than 24 hours, you can say it's warning. If it's greater than 48 hours, you could say it should give you failure. So those are some ways you could use your source freshness test, basically to ensure that you're only getting fresh data, and where there's a data delay or stale data, you are aware before the business teams get to be aware. This way, data quality issues and solving for you is not reactive, but it's proactive. So you get the alerts before it goes down there, and you solve the problem before they are even aware. Alright, so we have data tests. Just like the name implies, data tests your data. They're almost like auditors that come to audit the data that has been built in your data warehouse. So dbt builds your data in data warehouse. Now you want to test the data that's in the data warehouse. That's what data test does really. And it runs after a model is built, and it runs against an actual data. So you cannot run data tests on data that does not exist. you have to run a data test on data that already exists. And that's why your data test in your dbt workflow would run after the model has been built. Say that, for example, you have a model, say model A, and you run dbt build on model A. dbt would first of all build model A and then run the test you have set for model A. Could be a uniqueness test or a not null test on the ID field of that table, and then it's going to run those tests after the model has been built. Now, your data test is good for production jobs, and the SQL code basically is just there to catch failing records, right? So it's good for your production jobs. Once your data is built in your data warehouse, you run a test on it, right? To ensure that there are no failing records or failing rules there. Because if there are failing records or failing rules, it's going to go downstream to business users and it's going to affect your trust. But the goal for us with this video and with our data quality is to ensure that we increase our trust, or we increase our stakeholder trust on our data, and we can say that yes, our data is of optimal quality because we have done all the background checks on the data. That's essentially what data test is all about. Now, within dbt, there are two kinds of data tests. We have the generic test and we also have the singular test. Generic tests, as name implies, are tests that are not model specific. But however, these tests can be configured to fit with any models in your YAML files. And dbt comes or ships out of the box tests, right? There's a uniqueness test, there's a not null test, there's accepted value test, and there's a relationship test you can run out of the box within dbt, right? So for example, for all your models, you can always set a data test that tests for uniqueness within your data or ensuring that a particular field is not null. You could also do relationship tests between two models within your data warehouse or within your dbt project, and you can also do accepted value test out of the box using dbt generic test. So this is one way you can up your data quality game within your business or within your data team. You don't have to wait to build specific testing frameworks, but you can start using this out of the box dbt generic tests. Also, your generic tests are created similar to your macros, so that you can make columns and models arguments, right? So that you can apply those generic tests to different models, just as the name implies. So doesn't apply to just one model, but you can create it just like a macro that you can apply to several models in the same way using your YAML file for the testing, right? And if you wanted to create some generic tests, you can just create your SQL files within your test folder of your dbt project. So you can have your test folder and a generic folder where you have those SQL files in there, or you can put it in your models folder. Say models folder, test folder. Yes, just build that here. And it's quite customizable. Now let's talk about the singular test. Just as the name implies, the singular test is a test you build for a specific model. You write SQL code that is explicitly referencing a particular model. But then essentially the logic is the same. So if the SQL test fails, is generic, if the singular test rather fails, it's going to return records that it should not return. And if it passes, it's not going to return any record. Basically the same concept, right? That's really how the testing framework for dbt data testing works. And for a singular test for a particular model, you can also create that within the test folder of your dbt project or your model/test folder within your dbt project. Now let's talk about unit tests. In one of my videos, I talked about unit tests. You can check that in the link above and the link in the description below as well to have more details on how to use unit tests. Right, so your unit test, as name implies, they test SQL logic. Data test your data. Unit test your SQL logic. Your data test runs after your model is built. Your unit test runs before the model is built. Now, your unit test does not run against an actual data. For your data test, it runs against an actual data. For unit test, you provide inputs and expected outputs for your unit test. So you put an input and then you also put what the expected output should look like, and you use that for your unit test. It doesn't run against an actual data, just like your data test. They are defined in your YAML file and they are good for development and CI jobs, right? Unlike data tests that is good for production, your unit tests are better for development and CI jobs. Alright, so this is basically the tests available in dbt. Now, when can you use them? My recommendation, first of all, is that you want to have source freshness tests for your sources rather. So when you have source data coming in that you've defined in your sources HTML file, you want to integrate freshness tests into those sources, right? so that you get an alert when you have stale data. So that before a business stakeholder would ask and say, oh, we've not seen data for the last 2 days, you already have sent an information saying that, hey, we have some delays coming in from this source, and if you update it as data comes in, right? It just gives you a better light, also improves that data trust from the business. Other scenarios you want to use the generic test, for example, as a start, would be for your data source, for your data tables, right? So for starters, you can ensure you have uniqueness tests and not null tests in place to ensure that you have complete, accurate records as you would expect. Now, during development and your CI jobs, you can also put in unit tests in place to ensure that your SQL logic are working as expected. Say, for example, you use the case statement and you use the count instead of a sum, right? You may not flag that with a uniqueness or not null test, but with a unique test while you're developing, you would see that you're not getting the expected output. Because if you use a sum, you'd have gotten a more a higher number based on your business logic and number you've imputed for that, as opposed to the value you would have gotten from a count, right? So that's just ways you can begin to think of, or areas you can begin to think of how you can begin to improve your data quality within your business or your data teams. Now, if you're using dbt Cloud, you can go a step further to schedule alerts for you before a test fails. So if a test fails, you can schedule an alert to send you an alert to Slack or via email, right? Whenever that happens, using on your dbt Cloud jobs, right? So you can easily do this here so that you get an alert whenever this happens. And that's where you are proactively ensuring that data quality is up to date and data quality is on point. Speaking about generic tests, there are other testing features out there, or packages, I may say. There is the dbt-expectation, similar to great expectations, that you can use for your testing, right? You can use that package to get more testing options within your dbt project. Also, there is the elementary package that allows you to begin to visualize your data tests by seeing failures, passes, by models, by schemas, and by tables, and you can have a pictorial view or a data quality dashboard that begins to tell you how your data quality is doing, right? You can also build that in yourself if you wanted to, or you could leverage those packages, because those packages essentially are getting information from your artifacts, from your dbt artifacts. We've talked about dbt artifacts in one of our videos. You can check that in the link above or in our dbt playlist, right, to understand how artifacts work and how you can use them to begin to build this kind of observability dashboards for your data team, so that you guys are aware of what is happening within your data landscape. By now, you've seen that integrating data tests or dbt testing into your workflow would greatly improve your data quality as a data team. So you want to begin to see how you can essentially, at the end of the day, the goal is to improve your data quality. The goal is to ensure your stakeholders have trust in your data. Now, with these practices, you not only catch bad data before they come in, but you're going to build trust. And like I said earlier on, you build this trust one brick at a time. One brick at a time, right? Okay, so I hope you're able to get something good out of this video. I'd like to hit the thumbs up button and the subscribe button as well. Also hit the notification bell so you're notified once a new video drops in. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.